Royal Guard RAMS SUV through palace gates after seeing Charlotte's emergency signal from inside. The sun was slowly setting over the royal palace, casting long shadows across the wide lawns and golden gates. The evening air was calm, almost deceptively quiet, as if nothing unusual could ever happen in such a place. Guards walked in measured steps along the marble paths, scanning the area carefully, yet everything seemed normal. Tourists and visitors had long since left, leaving only the palace staff and the royal household moving about in their usual routine. Inside the palace, Charlotte sat quietly in her private chambers. The room was spacious, with tall windows letting in the fading light. Heavy curtains softened the glow, and the furniture was arranged with careful precision. Charlotte, usually cheerful and composed, felt a growing sense of unease today. Something about the way the evening had unfolded felt wrong, though she could not immediately put her finger on it. Earlier that day, a few minor incidents had caught her attention. Staff members seemed unusually tense, whispering in corners, glancing over their shoulders as if they were hiding something. Deliveries that usually arrived on schedule were delayed without explanation. And most strangely, she had noticed a shadowy figure lingering near the far end of the palace garden. When she asked the gardener about it, he waved it off, claiming it was probably just another employee. But Charlotte could not shake the feeling that she was being watched. She stood by the window, looking out at the palace grounds. The fountains reflected the last rays of sunlight, and the roses in the garden swayed gently in the evening breeze. Yet beneath this serene beauty, a tension grew in her chest. Charlotte's instincts, honed from years of palace life, told her that something was off. She had learned to trust those instincts. They had never led her wrong before. Charlotte's eyes flicked to a small device she kept hidden in her drawer. It was a discreet emergency signal system, meant to alert the royal guard instantly if she ever felt unsafe. She had never had to use it before. Normally, palace security was impeccable, and any threat was usually intercepted before reaching her. But tonight, her heart pounded with a sense of urgency she could not ignore. She picked up the device and examined it. It was simple to use. A single press would send a coded signal directly to the guard on duty. She hesitated for only a moment, knowing that using it would break the calm of the evening, potentially causing panic. But the small, uneasy feeling that had been growing inside her would not be ignored. A shadow moved across the room, a flicker of motion that made Charlotte stiffen. She could not see clearly from her position, but she sensed that someone or something was near. Her hand tightened around the device. With a deep breath, she pressed it. A faint click sounded in her hand, almost unnoticeable, but it was enough. Instantly, a silent alarm was triggered in the security office at the palace gates. Meanwhile, in the security office, Captain James Reynolds was finishing his routine checks. Reynolds was a tall man in his early 40s, with sharp eyes and a calm demeanor. He had served the royal family for more than a decade and had seen countless emergencies, drills, and threats, both real and imagined. His reputation was that of a man who stayed composed even in the most dangerous situations. Tonight, he was going over the patrol schedules for the evening, making sure every guard was in position and every camera was functioning properly. The palace gates were the most sensitive point of entry, and Reynolds always kept a close eye on the monitoring screens. As he glanced at the screens, a small red light blinked in the corner, one he had never seen before. It was the signal from Charlotte's device. Reynolds' instincts kicked in immediately. He knew that such a signal could only mean one thing: Charlotte was in danger. His heart did not race, but his mind worked faster than ever. Every second counted in situations like this. He quickly scanned the live feeds, trying to see what had triggered the alarm. Most of the palace appeared calm, the guards performing their usual routines, but there was a small area of shadow near the private chambers where the signal had originated. Without hesitation, Reynolds made a decision. He called out to the other guards in the office, his voice steady but urgent. "All units, hold your positions. I'm going to handle this myself." Charlotte needs immediate help. Some of the younger guards looked confused and even concerned. Breaking protocol, especially in a royal palace, was never taken lightly, but Reynolds did not hesitate. He had faced emergencies before, and he knew that hesitation could cost lives. Reynolds moved quickly to the vehicle bay, where the SUV assigned for rapid response was parked. The vehicle was armored and designed for speed, capable of navigating the palace grounds in minutes. Normally, no one would use it to break palace rules, but tonight, rules were secondary to Charlotte's safety. He climbed into the driver's seat, fastened his seatbelt, and started the engine. The hum of the powerful engine filled the quiet night, signaling that something unusual was about to happen. Back in her chambers, Charlotte paced nervously. Every creak of the wooden floor, every shadow that flickered against the walls made her heart leap. She tried to convince herself that it was nothing, that palace life sometimes created strange sounds. But deep down, she knew that something was terribly wrong. She crouched near the window, trying to stay out of sight, and waited for the guards to arrive. Her eyes scanned the garden outside, hoping to catch a glimpse of help. Seconds felt like minutes, and minutes stretched endlessly. Charlotte's mind raced, imagining worst-case scenarios, rehearsing what she might say or do if someone entered her room. She thought of her family, of the responsibility she carried as a member of the royal household, and of the dangers that sometimes came with it. She had been trained for public appearances and ceremonial duties, but tonight she realized that those skills would not save her. She needed someone experienced, someone brave. Reynolds was already on his way. The SUV moved with purpose, navigating the palace grounds with precision. The palace gates loomed ahead, the ornate metal glinting in the fading light. Other guards watched from a distance as the vehicle approached, confusion and alarm on their faces. Reynolds ignored their questions and warnings. He focused solely on the signal he had received and the thought of Charlotte waiting inside. The tension in the air was almost tangible. Every second brought Reynolds closer to the chambers, and every second Charlotte waited felt like an eternity. Inside her room, Charlotte's fingers tightened around the edge of her desk. She could hear the distant sound of engines approaching, and a flicker of hope sparked in her chest. Maybe help was coming. Maybe she would be safe. As the SUV neared the gates, Reynolds adjusted his course slightly, preparing for a move that no guard had ever made before. He had seen situations like this in training, but never had he felt such urgency. Every instinct told him that this was a critical moment. The palace gates, usually a symbol of protection and security, now stood between him and Charlotte. But he was determined to overcome any obstacle to reach her. Inside the security office, other guards watched in stunned silence as Reynolds took control. Some called on radios, questioning his actions, but he did not respond. His eyes were fixed on the palace, his mind calculating every possible risk. He knew that breaking protocol could have consequences, but in that instant, it was irrelevant. Charlotte's life mattered more than rules or procedures. Back in her chambers, Charlotte's anxiety grew, but she also felt a sense of relief. Someone had noticed her signal. Someone was coming. She adjusted her position, preparing to move if necessary, and whispered a quiet prayer for her safety. The palace, which had always seemed so secure, now felt fragile, vulnerable, and alive with tension. And then, in the quiet moments before the action, Charlotte realized that the world outside her window was no longer ordinary. The distant hum of the SUV was closer now, carrying with it the promise of rescue. Her pulse quickened, and she prepared herself for whatever was about to unfold. She knew that the coming moments would change everything. The SUV moved swiftly across the wide expanse of the palace grounds. The powerful engine rumbled softly at first, then louder, echoing against the high walls and marble pathways. Captain James Reynolds kept his eyes fixed on the private quarters where Charlotte was waiting. Every instinct in his body told him to hurry, but he knew he had to be careful. A single wrong move could endanger the person he had sworn to protect. As he drove, Reynolds quickly assessed the situation. The palace gates were closed, their ornate metal bars shining in the evening light. Normally, these gates were a symbol of security, meant to keep intruders out. Tonight, however, they had become an obstacle in his path. He knew that the only way to reach Charlotte in time was to act decisively. Hesitation, he realized, could cost her safety. Other guards watched from a distance as Reynolds maneuvered the SUV toward the gates. They were tense, unsure of what he was planning. Some called out through radios, reminding him of protocol and warning him to slow down. But Reynolds did not respond. His focus was singular, unwavering, Charlotte's life. He understood that rules were written for normal situations, not for emergencies like this. Inside her chambers, Charlotte heard the distant rumble of the approaching vehicle. Her heart leapt at the sound. Relief mixed with fear as she realized that someone had responded to her signal. But she also knew that the danger was not over. Whoever had triggered her alarm could still be nearby. She stayed low, moving silently to a safer part of the room. Her mind raced with thoughts of what could happen next, and her breathing quickened. Reynolds adjusted the SUV's speed, calculating the distance to the gates. He knew that ramming through the entrance was risky. The gates were reinforced, and a collision could damage the vehicle or even injure him. Yet, weighing the risks, he decided that speed was more important than caution. Time was the most valuable resource, and Charlotte's safety was worth any potential damage. As he approached the gates, Reynolds noticed the alarm lights flashing. The warning signals had gone off throughout the palace. Sirens began to sound faintly, alerting nearby guards and staff. Some of them rushed toward the gates, trying to understand what was happening. Confusion filled the air, and the tension grew thicker with every passing second. Charlotte crouched behind her desk, trying to control her nerves. She had been trained for emergencies, but nothing could have prepared her for this. The sounds outside were strange, almost surreal. The heavy hum of the SUV engine, the faint clatter of distant alarms, and the occasional shouts of guards. She wished she could see Reynolds, could know that he was close. But all she could do was wait and hope that he would arrive in time. Reynolds made a final decision. He accelerated, feeling the SUV's wheels grip the ground firmly. The gates loomed closer, intricate metalwork shining in the fading light. With a deep breath, he focused on the task ahead. The moment required precision and courage. He knew that if he succeeded, Charlotte would be safe. If he failed, the consequences could be severe. The SUV struck the gates. The collision was loud, echoing across the palace grounds like a thunderclap. Sparks flew as metal met metal, and the sound made some nearby guards step back in shock. Pieces of the gate bent and twisted under the force, creating a clear path for the vehicle. Reynolds did not flinch. His hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, guiding the SUV through the breach. Every second felt like an eternity, and the weight of responsibility pressed heavily on him. Inside her chambers, Charlotte jumped at the loud crash. The windows rattled slightly, and she could see a brief flash of light from the impact. Her heart raced, but she also felt hope rising within her. Someone was coming, someone determined to protect her. She listened closely, trying to discern the movements outside her room. She knew that Reynolds had broken through the gates, and the realization gave her courage. Reynolds steered the SUV through the twisted gates, careful not to damage the vehicle further. Guards who had been watching from a distance now moved to the sides, creating space for him. Some stared in disbelief, while others quickly radioed for backup. The situation was unusual, unprecedented even, but Reynolds' determination was clear. Nothing would stop him from reaching Charlotte. The palace grounds, which had always seemed safe and orderly, now felt like a stage for sudden chaos. Fountains splashed as Reynolds drove past, their waters reflecting the headlights of the SUV. Garden statues seemed to watch silently as the vehicle sped toward the private quarters. Each obstacle, each twist in the path, required skillful navigation. Reynolds remained calm, relying on his years of experience and training. Charlotte moved closer to the door, peeking cautiously. She could hear the engine approaching rapidly. Her pulse pounded in her chest, and her mind raced with both fear and anticipation. She had never experienced a moment like this, where her safety depended entirely on someone else's actions. Yet deep down, she trusted Reynolds. He had always been a reliable presence in the palace, someone she knew she could count on in an emergency. Reynolds finally reached the final stretch before Charlotte's chambers. The path narrowed, forcing him to slow slightly, but he maintained his focus. The SUV had sustained minor scratches and dents from the gate, but it was still functional. He knew that reaching her quickly was more important than worrying about damage. Every second mattered, and the sound of the engine roaring through the quiet palace added to the tension. Meanwhile, guards inside the palace continued to coordinate. Some ran toward the chambers, trying to intercept any potential threat. Others stayed back, managing alarms and ensuring that no one entered the grounds unexpectedly. The palace, a place usually associated with ceremony and order, was now a scene of controlled urgency. Every movement mattered, and every decision could have a significant impact. Charlotte's anxiety was mixed with a strange sense of excitement. She could feel that the climax of the situation was near. She adjusted her position, ready to move toward safety as soon as Reynolds arrived. Her hands trembled slightly, but she focused on remaining composed. The training she had received over the years, emergency drills, safety protocols, awareness exercises, was now truly put to the test. Reynolds slowed the SUV as he approached the final turn toward Charlotte's chambers. He scanned the surroundings carefully. Shadows moved in corners and the faint sound of footsteps could be heard. His heart remained steady, but his mind was alert, analyzing every possible risk. The palace grounds were complex with numerous paths and obstacles, but he knew them well. Every turn, every gate, every statue had been memorized during his years of service. At that moment, Charlotte's eyes met the window. She could see the SUV coming closer. Relief washed over her, but she stayed cautious. The situation was not over yet. Reynolds parked the vehicle near a side entrance, ensuring that the path to her room was clear. The engine idled, ready for any sudden movement. He quickly unbuckled his seatbelt and grabbed the emergency bag he kept in the SUV, containing first aid supplies, communication devices, and defensive tools if needed. Charlotte quietly opened her door, peeking out into the hallway. She could see Reynolds moving quickly but carefully toward her room. His presence was reassuring, and she felt a mixture of gratitude and relief. The moment of danger was still present, but the arrival of a trained, decisive protector changed the atmosphere. Hope began to replace fear, and she realized that she was no longer alone. Reynolds reached her room and motioned for her to stay calm. "Charlotte, it's okay. You're safe now," he said in a low, steady voice. The reassurance in his tone helped ease the tension that had built over the past minutes. Charlotte nodded, trusting him completely, and followed his instructions to move away from the window and toward a safer area of the room. The palace, though still alive with tension, now had a clear direction. The immediate danger was being addressed, and the presence of Reynolds ensured that Charlotte would be protected. The chaos outside, the alarms, the startled guards, the disrupted routine, was secondary to the priority at hand, keeping her safe. As they prepared to move toward a more secure location within the palace, Charlotte glanced at Reynolds with gratitude. The events of the past few minutes had been intense, but they also revealed the courage, skill, and dedication of someone she could rely on. In that moment, she understood the importance of trained, decisive action in critical situations, and the value of trust in those tasked with protection. The palace gates stood like silent sentinels, their tall, golden bars gleaming in the dim light of dusk. Normally, they were a symbol of safety, a boundary that no ordinary threat could cross. Tonight, however, they had become an obstacle, the final barrier between Captain James Reynolds and Charlotte. The SUV hummed steadily as Reynolds adjusted his position, checking the distance to the gates, the alignment of the vehicle, and the path ahead. His hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, and his jaw was set. He knew what he was about to do would be dangerous, but hesitation was not an option. Charlotte's safety depended on speed and precision. The palace grounds were quiet, except for the soft rumble of the SUV. Most of the guards had paused, unsure how to react to this unexpected breach. Some were frozen in shock, while others whispered hurried instructions into their radios. Sirens blared faintly from the gate's alarm system, signaling that an emergency was in progress. The flashing red lights reflected across the marble paths, adding a sense of urgency to the scene. Reynolds ignored all distractions. His focus was singular: reach Charlotte no matter the cost. Inside her chambers, Charlotte felt the sound of the SUV grow louder. She crouched behind a chair, peeking cautiously through the gap between the curtains. Her heart pounded like a drum, and every sound made her jump. She could see the glow of the vehicle's headlights approaching the gates, cutting through the dim evening light. Relief surged in her chest, but it was mingled with fear. The moment of rescue was here, but danger was still very real. Reynolds pressed the accelerator slightly, testing the gate's response. The reinforced metal bars stood strong, unyielding. He knew the collision would be loud and forceful. Sparks flew from the impact point as he nudged the SUV forward, metal scraping against metal. The sound echoed across the palace grounds, startling nearby guards and sending a flock of birds into the evening sky. The SUV shuddered slightly, but Reynolds maintained control, keeping his eyes locked on the path through the gate. The moment of impact came suddenly. The SUV hit the gates with a jolt, sending a loud crash reverberating through the palace. Charlotte gasped, clutching the edge of her desk for support. The gates bent and twisted under the force, creating an opening just wide enough for the vehicle to pass through. Sparks flew, metal groaned, and dust filled the air. It was chaotic, loud, and dramatic, everything that Reynolds had anticipated. But he remained calm, steadying the vehicle as it moved forward. Guards outside scattered instinctively, creating space for the SUV. Some shouted in alarm, others tried to radio for assistance, and a few simply froze, watching in disbelief. This was not how palace security was supposed to function, but Reynolds had made a choice. The rules were secondary to saving a life. As the SUV passed through the shattered gate, the sound of tearing metal faded slightly, replaced by the steady hum of the vehicle moving toward Charlotte. Inside her chambers, Charlotte's eyes widened. The chaos outside was terrifying yet reassuring. Someone had come for her. She could see the lights flickering through the broken gate, moving closer. Her breathing was rapid, but she forced herself to stay calm. She moved carefully toward the door, ready to follow Reynolds' lead once he reached her. Every sense in her body was alert, every sound magnified by the tension of the moment. Reynolds slowed slightly as the SUV cleared the gate, ensuring he did not lose control on the uneven path. The crushed metal of the gate glinted in the headlights, a testament to the force of his action. Sparks still flew occasionally as the vehicle rolled over twisted edges, but the path was clear. He could see the familiar walls of the palace corridors ahead, leading him straight to Charlotte's chambers. Relief mixed with determination in his mind. He was almost there, but the final stretch required as much focus as the first. The palace grounds, which had seemed orderly moments ago, were now a scene of controlled chaos. Fountains splashed as the SUV passed, their water catching the light from the vehicle's headlights. Statues appeared to watch silently as Reynolds drove past, a silent audience to the unfolding drama. Guards moved quickly, some helping to direct bystanders away from the area, others securing the perimeter. The palace, a place of tradition and order, had become a stage for decisive action, and Reynolds was at the center of it. Charlotte's pulse raced as she prepared to leave her hiding spot. She could hear Reynolds approaching, and a wave of relief washed over her. Yet she remained cautious. The danger had not completely passed, and she knew that she needed to move carefully. Her training, though theoretical, now felt like a lifeline. She adjusted her footing, ready to follow Reynolds' instructions without hesitation. The SUV finally came to a stop near the side entrance to her chambers. Reynolds quickly stepped out, checking the surroundings as he moved toward the door. Every shadow was scanned, every sound noted. He carried himself with calm authority, reassuring Charlotte that she was no longer alone. "Charlotte, it's okay. Stay calm. We're going to move you to safety," he said in a low, steady voice. His tone carried confidence, and it reached her, helping to ease her fear. Charlotte moved toward him, her steps careful but determined. She could see the concern and focus in Reynolds' eyes. He gestured for her to stay close, to avoid any unnecessary movement while they navigated the corridors. The palace, though still echoing with distant alarms, seemed slightly less threatening with Reynolds by her side. Every step they took was measured, cautious, and deliberate, yet swift enough to ensure safety. As they moved through the palace, Reynolds remained vigilant. He scanned every corridor, every corner, anticipating possible obstacles or threats. Charlotte followed closely, trusting his judgment completely. The sounds of the broken gates behind them were fading, but the tension remained. The palace had been disrupted, its usual calm replaced by urgency and controlled panic. Yet, Reynolds' presence brought a sense of security that Charlotte had not felt before. They reached a small stairwell leading to an inner section of the palace, a place where Charlotte could be safe until the situation was fully under control. Reynolds opened the door and gestured for her to enter first. She hesitated for only a moment before stepping inside, feeling the protective weight of his guidance. The stairwell was narrow, quiet, and shielded from outside view. For the first time since sending the emergency signal, Charlotte felt a sense of relief, though she remained alert. Outside, palace guards continued to manage the situation. Some inspected the broken gates, noting the damage caused by the SUV. Others coordinated with security personnel to ensure no one could take advantage of the breach. Radios buzzed constantly, and the flashing alarm lights created an atmosphere of tension that persisted even as Charlotte moved to safety. Reynolds' decision to act decisively had shifted the focus from protocol to protection, and now everyone was responding to that reality. Charlotte paused for a moment, catching her breath. Her hands trembled slightly, but she was grateful for Reynolds' courage and quick thinking. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the faint hum of the alarm system. Reynolds nodded, acknowledging her words without breaking his focus. There was no time for celebration yet. The situation still required careful handling. Reynolds guided Charlotte through the inner corridors, keeping her close to the walls, away from windows or potential points of exposure. He explained briefly what had happened, ensuring she understood the urgency of the situation while keeping her calm. His tone was steady, controlled, and reassuring, a sharp contrast to the chaos that had just occurred outside. Charlotte listened carefully, absorbing every word, knowing that staying composed was essential for her safety. As they moved, Charlotte realized the true extent of the palace's security measures. Hidden cameras, sensors, and communication lines had been active throughout the emergency. The coordination among guards, despite the initial shock, was impressive. Yet she also understood why Reynolds had acted independently. In emergencies, rules could not always anticipate the complexity and immediacy of real threats. His decision to act boldly had likely prevented a far more serious situation. Finally, they reached a secure room within the palace, one used for emergencies and safe gatherings. Reynolds checked the locks and ensured the area was secure before allowing Charlotte to relax slightly. She sank into a chair, her body still trembling from the adrenaline. Reynolds stayed close, scanning the hallway outside, maintaining vigilance even though immediate danger seemed to have passed. Charlotte looked at him with a mix of awe and gratitude. The events of the past minutes had been intense, chaotic, and frightening, but they had also revealed the courage, skill, and decisiveness of someone she could truly trust. In that moment, she understood the importance of experience, quick thinking, and dedication in protecting others. Reynolds' actions had made all the difference. The palace gates behind them were now a reminder of both danger and heroism. Though damaged, they had been the stage for a dramatic rescue, a moment that would be remembered by those present. Reynolds had acted decisively, putting life above protocol, and in doing so, he had ensured that Charlotte was safe. The chaos had subsided, replaced by controlled vigilance, and a quiet sense of relief settled over the palace grounds. The hallway leading to Charlotte's chambers was quiet now, but the calm was deceptive. Captain James Reynolds moved cautiously, his eyes scanning every corner, every shadow. He knew that even though he had broken through the gates, danger could still be present inside. Intruders, if there were any, might still be near, or someone could try to exploit the momentary chaos. Every step he took was careful, deliberate, yet swift enough to maintain control of the situation. Charlotte followed closely, her breathing steadier now but still uneven from the adrenaline. She clutched her hands together, trying to steady them. The events of the past hour had left her shaken, but seeing Reynolds in action gave her confidence. His calm presence was reassuring, a steady anchor in the midst of uncertainty. She tried to focus on his instructions, on the clear plan he seemed to have in mind, rather than her fear. Reynolds led her to the inner section of the palace, an area less traveled by staff and mostly used for emergencies or private access. The walls were lined with thick tapestries, softening the sound of their footsteps, and small windows provided minimal light. The atmosphere was tense but contained. Reynolds glanced back at Charlotte, ensuring she was following closely. "We need to keep moving," he said quietly. "Stay close to me and do exactly what I say. Everything else is secondary." Charlotte nodded, trusting his judgment completely. She moved silently, aware of the responsibility she carried for staying calm and following instructions. Every sound, every movement seemed magnified in the narrow corridor. A distant echo of alarms from the gates reminded them both that the situation outside was still active. Yet inside, they were isolated, and Reynolds had control. As they approached Charlotte's chambers, Reynolds slowed slightly to listen. He could hear faint noises, footsteps, hushed voices, and the occasional scrape against the floor. His experience told him these sounds could indicate intruders or simply palace staff responding to the alarm. Either way, caution was necessary. He signaled Charlotte to crouch near a wall, keeping her out of sight, and moved ahead. Inside the chambers, the scene was slightly chaotic. A few staff members were moving quickly, checking locks, securing doors, and ensuring no one had entered. Reynolds assessed the situation in seconds, his mind analyzing every angle. He noticed that one of the interior doors had been left slightly ajar. It could be innocent, but he treated it as a potential risk. Every moment counted, and any misstep could compromise Charlotte's safety. Reynolds moved toward the slightly open door, stepping carefully but quickly. He peered inside, scanning for threats. The room beyond was empty, thankfully, but the shadows cast by the dim light made it hard to be certain. He signaled Charlotte to move closer, keeping her low and shielded. Her trust in him allowed her to follow his movements without hesitation, even as her heart raced. "Stay close," Reynolds whispered. "We're almost to a secure area. Keep low and quiet." Charlotte obeyed, her movements precise and controlled. She noticed the determination in his eyes, the unwavering focus. It gave her confidence that she would be safe, despite the uncertainty surrounding them. The palace, which had felt imposing and secure, now seemed fragile, vulnerable even, but Reynolds' presence provided a sense of protection. As they continued down the corridor, Reynolds' mind ran through potential scenarios. He considered the possibility of hidden intruders, the need to secure communication with other guards, and ways to ensure Charlotte's safety until the threat was fully neutralized. His years of experience allowed him to anticipate problems before they appeared, and he adapted his movements to minimize risk. Every step was calculated, every decision deliberate. Charlotte's perspective was a mix of fear and admiration. She realized how dangerous a situation could become if someone acted recklessly. Reynolds' composure showed her the importance of training, experience, and courage. She had always known palace security was tight, but now she understood that no protocol could replace decisive action when lives were at stake. His calm efficiency reassured her, and for the first time since the emergency began, she felt a glimmer of hope. Reynolds reached a reinforced door leading to a small, secure room. This room was designed for emergencies, with sturdy locks, minimal windows, and easy access for security personnel. He checked the locks, ensuring the door could not be forced open easily, then gestured for Charlotte to enter first. She stepped inside, her movements careful but confident, knowing that she was finally moving toward safety. Once inside, Reynolds assessed the room. It was quiet, and the faint hum of the palace beyond the walls seemed distant. He ensured all entry points were secure and that there were no immediate threats. Only then did he allow himself a brief moment to relax, though his attention remained on Charlotte. "You're safe for now," he said. "We'll wait here until the situation is fully under control." Charlotte sank into a chair, her hands still trembling slightly. Relief washed over her, but she remained aware that the danger was not completely over. Reynolds' presence was comforting, but she knew that the palace had been breached, and there was always the possibility of additional threats. Her mind reflected on the events that had unfolded, from sending the emergency signal to seeing the SUV crash through the gates. It had been a harrowing experience, and yet she realized how critical, quick, decisive action could be in moments like this. Reynolds stayed close, keeping a careful watch on the hallway outside. He adjusted the door slightly, listening for any sounds that might indicate movement beyond the room. Every sound, no matter how faint, was important. His focus never wavered. Charlotte noticed the intensity in his gaze, the way he analyzed every detail, and she felt a sense of gratitude and admiration. His professionalism and dedication had made all the difference. The room itself was designed for such emergencies. Communication lines were accessible, allowing Reynolds to coordinate with other guards without leaving Charlotte unprotected. First aid supplies, emergency tools, and defensive equipment were within reach. He ensured Charlotte was comfortable but remained alert, ready to respond to any sudden changes. Her safety was his only priority, and everything he did reflected that commitment. Charlotte spoke softly, breaking the silence. "Thank you for coming so quickly." Her voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried sincerity and relief. Reynolds nodded without turning, acknowledging her gratitude while keeping his focus on the potential risks outside. "It's my job," he said. "But more importantly, you're safe now. That's what matters." As they waited, the palace staff and other guards continued to secure the area outside. The initial chaos had subsided, but the breach had left a mark. Some staff members were anxious. while others worked to restore order and ensure that all access points were monitored. Reynolds used this time to communicate with them, confirming that Charlotte's location was secure and that any potential threats were being managed. Charlotte reflected on the events, realizing how quickly situations could escalate. A peaceful evening had turned into a moment of intense danger, and the response had required courage, speed, and careful judgment. She felt fortunate that Reynolds had been available, someone capable of assessing risk and acting decisively. Her perspective on safety, security, and trust had shifted. She understood that in critical moments, the actions of one skilled individual could make all the difference. Reynolds remained vigilant, watching for any sign of disturbance. Even in the calm of the secure room, he knew that emergencies could change in an instant. His training, experience, and focus allowed him to anticipate potential issues and respond effectively. Charlotte, observing him, realized the depth of responsibility carried by those who protect others. It was not just about following rules, it was about understanding risk, taking decisive action, and ensuring safety. After a few minutes, the situation outside began to stabilize. Alarms were being silenced, the broken gates inspected, and the palace staff coordinated to prevent any further incidents. Reynolds maintained his watch but allowed himself to relax slightly. Charlotte, now feeling safer, let out a breath she had been holding, grateful for the skill and dedication of the guard who had risked everything to reach her. The emergency had revealed not only the danger that could arise unexpectedly, but also the courage and commitment of those tasked with protection. Charlotte understood the importance of clear communication, trust, and decisive action. Reynolds' calm, controlled presence had been the anchor that guided her through the crisis, and she felt a deep sense of respect for his professionalism. As the minutes passed, Charlotte and Reynolds remained in the secure room, monitoring the situation together. She realized that while the immediate threat had passed, vigilance was still necessary. The palace had been shaken, and restoring normalcy would require time, attention, and continued care. Yet with Reynolds by her side, she felt confident that she was safe, and that any further actions would be handled with skill and precision. The chaos of the evening had slowly begun to settle. The broken palace gates, twisted and dented from the force of the SUV, stood as a stark reminder of the events that had unfolded. Security personnel moved carefully, inspecting the damage, while other staff worked to repair barriers and restore the palace grounds to their usual order. Alarms had quieted, and the flashing red lights that had once signaled emergency now stood silent. Yet despite the calm, the palace remained alive with tension and the memory of the night's events. Captain James Reynolds remained in the secure room with Charlotte, ensuring that she was calm and safe. Her breathing had returned to normal, though her hands still trembled slightly from the adrenaline. She had sat in the chair for several minutes, processing what had just happened. The reality of the situation was only beginning to sink in. She had sent an emergency signal, and the very person she had trusted had acted decisively, risking protocol and personal safety to reach her. She looked at Reynolds with gratitude, the weight of the night pressing on her shoulders. Reynolds, meanwhile, was already thinking about the broader implications. While Charlotte's safety had been secured, the palace itself had been compromised in a way it never had before. He made mental notes about how the breach had occurred, the timing of the alarms, and the gaps in protocol that had become evident. Even in the relief of the moment, his mind was disciplined, focused on how to prevent a similar incident in the future. That was his duty, to protect the royal family and the palace grounds, even under the most challenging circumstances. Charlotte finally broke the silence, her voice soft but steady. "James, thank you. I don't know what I would have done without you." Reynolds nodded, not because he needed thanks, but because he understood the importance of acknowledgement in moments like this. "You don't need to worry anymore," he replied calmly. "You're safe, and that's what matters. Everything else will be taken care of." Outside the secure room, palace staff continued to assess the situation. Officers documented the damage, security cameras were reviewed, and communication lines ensured that no one remained unaccounted for. Other guards who had witnessed Reynolds' actions discussed the unusual decision he had made to ram the gates. There was some hesitation, a question of whether protocol had been broken, but the understanding quickly grew that his choice had been necessary. In a crisis, the life of the royal family outweighed rules and procedures. News of the incident slowly spread throughout the palace. Senior officials were informed, and there were questions about the damages, the alarms, and the emergency response. Reynolds provided a clear report of the events, explaining his actions and their reasoning. He described the signal from Charlotte, the urgency of the situation, and the steps he had taken to ensure her safety. His report was detailed, precise, and professional, highlighting not only the emergency response, but also the importance of quick decision-making. Charlotte remained in the secure room, reflecting quietly. The adrenaline had faded, leaving a mixture of relief and awe. She thought about the events leading up to the emergency, the subtle signs she had noticed, the uneasy feeling in her chambers, the decision to send the emergency signal, and the arrival of Reynolds. Every moment had led to this point, and she realized the critical role of intuition, trust, and trained judgment in moments of danger. As the night continued, palace officials arrived to discuss repairs and security updates. Plans were made to restore the gates, improve alarm systems, and ensure that the palace would be even safer in the future. While the physical damage could be repaired, the emotional impact of the evening remained. For Charlotte, it was a reminder of how quickly life could change, and how important it was to have people she could trust in critical situations. Reynolds took a moment to step outside the secure room, observing the palace grounds. The SUV, still near the damaged gates, bore the marks of the collision. Twisted metal, scratches, and bent bars testified to the urgency and power of his actions. Yet he did not dwell on the damage. Property could be repaired, lives could not. He allowed himself a brief moment of satisfaction, knowing that the night's events had been handled with skill and decisiveness. Charlotte watched him from the room, her eyes thoughtful. She realized that heroism was not about recognition or praise. It was about responsibility, courage, and the ability to act under pressure. Reynolds had demonstrated all of these qualities in abundance. She felt a deep sense of respect for him, not just as a guard, but as someone willing to put everything on the line to protect another person. It was a lesson she would not forget. As the first hints of morning light crept through the palace windows, Reynolds and Charlotte finally had a moment to breathe. The immediate threat was gone, the palace was being secured, and the staff had regained control. Charlotte stood, walking to the window, looking out at the gardens now quiet in the early light. The fountains shimmered in the soft glow of dawn, the chaos of the night now only a memory. She felt a sense of gratitude mixed with reflection. The palace, for all its grandeur, was only as secure as the people who protected it. Reynolds joined her by the window, keeping a careful watch on the surroundings even as the danger had passed. He spoke softly, his voice measured. "The palace will recover. The gates can be repaired, the alarms adjusted, but what matters most is that you are safe. That will never change." Charlotte nodded, understanding the gravity of his words. Safety, trust, and vigilance were paramount, and Reynolds had embodied all of them. Later, senior palace officials conducted a review of the incident. Reynolds' actions were scrutinized, discussed, and ultimately praised. While the breach of protocol was noted, it was universally acknowledged that his decision had saved Charlotte's life. Recognition of his courage spread quietly throughout the staff, a reminder that in extraordinary situations, bravery and quick thinking could outweigh rigid rules. Reynolds received formal acknowledgement, but more importantly, he earned the enduring respect and trust of the royal family. Charlotte, reflecting on the events, realized that this night would stay with her forever. She understood that emergencies could arise in the most unexpected ways, and that preparedness, vigilance, and trust were essential. The lessons learned were not just about safety, but about human courage, responsibility, and the impact of decisive action. She felt a newfound appreciation for the people who dedicated their lives to protecting others, and for the instincts that had guided her to act quickly. Reynolds returned to his duties, quietly resuming the daily routines of palace security. Yet the events of the night had left their mark. He had faced a unique situation, made a difficult decision, and succeeded in ensuring safety against the odds. His professionalism, calm demeanor, and courage had been tested, and he had proven capable. For him, the acknowledgement was secondary to the satisfaction of knowing that Charlotte was safe, and that he had fulfilled his duty. Charlotte spent the rest of the morning in reflection. She thought about the moments leading up to the emergency, the subtle signs, the uneasy feelings, the courage it took to send a signal for help. She realized that safety was not just about walls, gates, or alarms, but about people who were trained, skilled, and willing to act decisively. Her respect for Reynolds deepened, and she knew she would never forget the events of the night. The palace slowly returned to normalcy. Gates were repaired, alarms were tested, and security protocols updated. Guards resumed their routine patrols, staff members went about their duties, and the grand halls once again echoed with the calm rhythms of daily life. Yet beneath the normality, there was an unspoken acknowledgement of the night's events, a shared understanding of courage, dedication, and responsibility. Charlotte finally left the secure room, walking through the halls she had long known as safe. Each step reminded her of the tension, the danger, and the bravery that had defined the night. She passed the repaired gates, glancing at them thoughtfully. They were stronger now, reinforced and restored, but she knew that the real strength had come from human courage and decisive action. Reynolds had embodied that strength, and she felt a lasting gratitude. In the quiet of the palace gardens, Reynolds took a moment for himself. He reflected on the night's events, the urgency, and the decisions he had made. He thought about Charlotte, about her trust, and about the responsibility he carried as a guardian. For him, the event was both a test and a reminder of why his role was essential. Protecting lives required skill, courage, and the willingness to act even when the risks were high. He had done all of these things, and in doing so, he had ensured that the royal household remained safe. Charlotte returned to her chambers, a sense of calm settling over her. The adrenaline had faded, replaced by reflection and understanding. She thought about trust, courage, and the unpredictable nature of life. She realized that bravery often appeared in moments of uncertainty, when rules were secondary to action, and when one person's determination could make a difference. Reynolds had demonstrated all of these qualities, and she felt deeply grateful. By the time the sun had fully risen, the palace was once again a place of order, routine, and beauty. The fountains sparkled, the gardens were quiet, and the halls echoed with normal activity. Yet the events of the previous night would not be forgotten. They had revealed not only the fragility of security, but also the strength of those who protected it. Reynolds' actions had saved a life, restored trust, and reminded everyone that courage and skill were the greatest defenses in moments of danger.